Y'all like my thing?
By his stripes you were already healed. Let Romans 4:21 prophesy to you. Receive it. Oh, fill us up. We receive it. Yes, we receive.
I had a dream 2 days ago, and I was supposed to record this message, but I've been running everywhere, so 2 birds with 1 stone. We're gonna do it live. I'm gonna tell about the dream that I had. Prophet, being called to be a prophet. So I'm gonna start with this dream first. 2 days ago I had a dream, and first of all, growing up I did a lot of stuff, from tumbling, cheer, dancing, gymnastics, sports, pageants, you name it, I was in it. My mom kept me very active, but really it was God preserving the anointing over my life. So in this dream, pause, let me reverse. I used to also cheer and tumble, right? I used to have a mind block because I had failed so many times, and I've always been really, really small. So I was always the girl that had to like put up in a stunt, and that was the one who was always doing the most stuff because I was always really small. So in this dream, right, there was this person who was like a big bodybuilder, and he was telling me he thought that I was doing something to be in competition. But what he didn't know is that I had did those things when I was little, but I stopped doing them. It's a method to my madness. Let me show y'all how good God is. So in the dream, there were people who was tumbling. They was doing like flips and backflips and stuff like that. So as I saw them doing the flips and backflips, it inspired me to start back tumbling as well. So I went to grab my cheer mat. I don't know where I got a cheer mat from, y'all. I went to grab my cheer mat, and I started to go to the yard to go flip too. So he stops me, and he's like, everything is not a competition, yada yada yada. And I was like, what? Okay, I was gonna say we're not doing that. I was like, what? And so then he continues talking, but I stopped him and I said, they can't be me and I can't be them. What you don't know is that I did this when I was little, but I had a mind block. This was my exact words to the person in the dream. And I told them actually seeing them inspired me to go back into who I was when I was little. So then God took me, of course, to Jeremiah chapter 1. I already knew that God was speaking about Jeremiah chapter 1 when he says, I knew you before I formed you in your mother's womb. There's a lot of things. And then also going forth, he then tells him that he's called to be a prophet. And Jeremiah is saying, I'm too young to be a prophet. And God telling Jeremiah, don't say you too young, because I'm going to touch your mouth and then you're going to say what I put inside of your mouth. So it's not going to be you that's speaking. It's going to be my spirit that's speaking through you. So then, it's really funny to me how, like, as we grow older, because we come out of that like intimate space with God as we were, you know, in the womb and stuff like that, we forget our identity. But as you continue to go on and progress in life, God begins to remind you, and what was lost will be found. And he reminded me of the story of Saul. Like when Saul was being anointed king, Saul was looking for donkeys that he had lost. But what he didn't know is that there was a whole setup just to get him in the position for the king to recognize him, so that he could be, so that the prophet could recognize him, so that he could be pushed into being a king, which was what God had for him all along. So sometimes when you start looking for things that you've lost in your youth and just in general, God will use that desire. He'll use that passion to reveal to you, you know what? This was always in you. You always had a voice. You've always been a dreamer. You've always been called to ministry. You've always been called to do my works. You just didn't know because you went through a season of life where you were in hiding. And then God reminded me of the story of Jesus. Jesus literally, when he, first of all, before he was even born, it was prophecy about him. Then when he came, he presented that his mom and dad used to go to, correct me if I'm wrong, they used to go to this annual feast every single year. And at this feast, Jesus, as a little boy, before it was even his time, Jesus would still go and sit in the temple and learn from the instructors. They were looking for Jesus, and Jesus was behind. I think it was 3 days that they traveled without Jesus, and Jesus was behind them. And when they finally came back, he was in the temple, and his mom and dad were like, why did you make us do all of this worrying and looking for you? And Jesus tells them, don't you know that I have to be about my Father's business? He had an understanding of who he was even as a little boy, even though it wasn't time for him to walk into that yet. And then it goes forth to speak about how he goes into his wilderness and he goes into his hiding, and then randomly one day Jesus just pops up on the scene like, what's up, it's time. And then he don't even with him doing that, he still has been doing miracles behind closed doors. But then his mom tells him they don't got no more wine, and he like, okay, look, what they got to do with me? And she's basically turned to the disciples and she tell them, do whatever he tell you to do. And so in a split second, he goes from being behind closed doors to being pushed into the forefront for what he was always called to do. You never know when God is going to say, okay, it's your time to walk into who I called you